is Alejo Vietti, the famous, the one and only. Um, he has worked regionally, nationally. He's the costume designer for Holiday Inn, Allegiance, and Beautiful the Carole King musical on Broadway, along with a massive list of off-Broadway credits and regional credits. An amazing, amazing person. I'm going to let Alejo introduce himself a little bit and his background, and then we can get into some questions and answers.
Well, hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. As he said, my name is Alejo Vietti. I'm a costume designer. I'm originally from Argentina. I moved to the US a long time ago, 1997 approximately. And I started what I wanted a career in costume design and theater. And here I am years later. As I've been always based in New York, and I work as an assistant, as an associate, as a designer, and I stopped doing any kind of assistant or associate work after Jersey Boys was my last project. So whenever that opened as an associate. And been very lucky and been very fortunate to work in many different places, Broadway, off Broadway, national tours, like had a chance to work, abroad, like in Japan and Ukraine and London and Australia, etc. So, being very, very fortunate until March 13 of this year. Like everybody else, everything evaporated. So, and here we are, right, dealing with this new world and what's going to happen, right? Nobody knows, especially with the performing arts.
What can you tell us about some of the projects you were working on when COVID-19 affected your business?
I was working. I was working on an off-Broadway production of A Touch of a Poet, Eugene O'Neill's play at the Irish Rep in New York, and I was working on a new play at Arena Stage in Washington D.C. called Celia and Fidel, about the relationship of Fidel Castro and on his entourage and Celia Sanchez mostly, and that we started previous, and I think after two previous we have to shut it down because of the pandemic. And I have a bunch of like projects lined up, through the year that everything's being postponed, but who knows until when, right? And also, we the saddest, sorry to interrupt, but the saddest one was like we just had relaunch a second national tour in the UK, a UK tour of Beautiful in January, and in March we had to, of course, stop it. And unfortunately, after a few months, we were told that it was booked for the rest of a year solid. We were told that it's not coming back. So basically, all those actors and technicians and backstage people, like, that had that 1 year contract, but like lost everything. And I had a production of Hunchback of Notre Dame that I do for Disney in Germany. It was in Germany for a few years. And it's been in Tokyo for a bunch of years that we were told, actually, December of last year, we were officially informed that it will be in Tokyo for another 10 to 15 years. It came down in March, then it went back too fast in May, and they had to shut it down again. And now they say that it probably won't come back until 2022. So every country, is approaching it differently, and there's this uncertainty of what's going to happen.
I think it's interesting that you bring up tours and international productions. I think a lot of people don't realize that when you're a designer on Broadway, you are also designing the national tours and other things. Can you talk about a little bit about recreating your designs over and over for different productions and how you have to adapt it for different scenarios?
It's actually great. It's a great chance because it's a chance that you have to revisit your original design. So you have different challenges, maybe you have like textiles that they no longer exist, and then you have things that you can improve either for quick change or mobility of the performer, like it was challenging maybe for a dance number or whatever. So I found it always kind of very, very fascinating and interesting to revisit a show that you've done either for a tour or for a second or third production of it. It's it has its challenge because sometimes the director has something fixed in mind, and sometimes you cannot do exactly the same thing because maybe it was a piece that you found on a vintage store or even on a regular store. So you have to figure out a way like to recreate that the closest version possible. And sometimes they do ask you to do changes, or even and you adapt also for different actors, especially with the leads. You cannot force your design. You have to kind of adapt it to the bodies and the physicality. So I found it personally very gratifying and very interesting to revisit a show on a tour, etc. And it always is in those kind of shows. It always is also you really, really need to hire the really, really good wardrobe supervisor because it will maintain the quality and the standard of the show. Because when a show is in New York, and if you are based in New York, it's easy for you to just call up the GM and say, please, I want a ticket for tomorrow. I want to check on the show. And then you give notes to your crew. But when the show is on tour, you don't have the chance to do that. So we really rely on the team that you hire to the wardrobe, especially when you get to the last legs of a tour, because the beginning of a tour, if it's an important or a big show, you do longer sit downs. You do like 2 weeks, 1 week, 4 weeks, even in a major city. But then as the show, and then when you finish the circuit through America, you kind of start again and you're being booked in maybe smaller venues or smaller cities. So then the stay of the show is shorter. So as it progresses, then you have like the last leg is what we call the one-nighters, meaning that you do a show, and after the show you pack up and then you travel the next day, and maybe the next evening or the evening after you're already in a different city. So you have to be very conscious of that. Like in some cases you have to downsize because you're not allowed to have the same amount of gondolas for each show. So it's very, very interesting.
I want to talk a little bit. I know people who are in my class are used to either an educational theater or regional theater where there's a costume shop associated with the producing organization. That's obviously different when producing Broadway shows. Can you tell me a little bit about contracting costume shops and how you make decisions about what pieces are built by what shops, and also how much is done by your own design team?
That's a good question because when you do, like you say, show regionally, most theaters have a shop, and you outsource sometimes when the shop, is doesn't, like you have more costumes needed to be built that what the costume shop can afford to build. But when you do a show in New York commercially, let's talk about commercial theater, Broadway, you have nothing. They hire you, and it's very important that you do a good budget because they're going to give you an initial number. And in that number, you have to think that everything is included, not the salary of your associates or your assistants. You negotiate that separately, but you do have to, for example, rent a space, which will be, let's say if the show is beautiful, will be the beautiful office space. And so you have to negotiate that. And as you can imagine, that's very expensive in New York. Usually you'd rent it in a costume shop. Costume shops usually have extra rooms that they rent to designers and their teams for specific shows. I mean, if the show is successful, sometimes you keep that room and you keep it almost as a storage or whatever. But once you rent that room, and you have to provide this budget, and it has to be very detailed because the more accurate you are, the better results you'll have. So usually when my associate and I prepare a budget, you have an Excel spreadsheet and pages and pages, and you go character by character, and you break down every single item, and you break down if it's going to be built, what's the build cost, if you're going to have materials purchased for that build, how much it will cost, if you have to have, alterations that after, or things specialty, dyer, painter, distressing, how much it will be, accessories, shoes, socks, suspenders, watches, earrings, everything. So it could be pages and pages and pages, and you come up with a final number. You present that to the producers, and then you start negotiating. And the tricky part is like in commercial theater, you have to take care of swings and understudies. So an understudy is somebody, that replace a person in case like the person cannot, show up because he's sick or whatever. And that's usually inside the company. Like somebody, let's say an ensemble person who's playing this part will play this other part when somebody else is out. And a swing is a person that is hired specifically to be on call to cover all the parts of the ensemble, whether it's a male or a female. Usually you have, in Beautiful, we had four swings. We have an ensemble, a white female ensemble, a male swing, and then a female, African American female swing, and an African American male swing, because there's like these groups within the show called the Shirelles and the Drifters, which existed in reality. So you need to have those people. So when you think about it, after you've done your show, you have to recreate basically the whole show for those people. So in the case of the swings, you design new costumes, because let's say there's a number in the show when there's like 8 male ensemble people dress all differently. So what you do, you create a 9th design for your swing. So if they have to go in for any of those parts, they can fit in, and you don't have to recreate 8 different costumes, unless it's something super specific. And you do the same with the women. So at the end of the day, you have to be very also specific when you budget that, because it can be extremely expensive to do the swings and understudies.
That's fascinating. Thank you for going over all that. Just to give a perspective to the students, what would I know? And there's no such thing as
sorry, Trent, I didn't finish that question whatsoever.
Oh, sorry.
So because you ask about the shops, etc. So anyway, so after you design the show and you get that show presented to usually what I do is like I present it to the director. And if the director likes it, we go ahead and present it to the producer. Or if the director wants different things, I resketch, show it to the director, and that with the design that we both like, go to the producer. And then you start negotiating. So once you have this lump of money, that usually is never what you want. It doesn't matter how big the Broadway show is, it's never what you want. And always you have extra costs. Once you have that lump of money, you start, since you have worked, hopefully in the past, you have a knowledge of like what are the shops that you want to use and what's the forte of each shop. It's like this, I have Showgirls and this shop is really good doing that kind of costume. I really want to do that, but they're expensive. So how can we compensate? Okay, let's take these ones that are like just like more regular clothes. We'll send it to a shop that is sometimes out of town. The prices in shops out of New York, it's much lower. And the reason is because the shops in New York have extraordinary rentals for these, massive spaces they have. And they have, most of the time, they have unions teachers, and they have to, cover like insurance and like all these other costs. And all that is reflected on the cost of the final product. So, but a professional shop in New York will give you full service, meaning that you go with a sketch and you meet with the drapers, and then they will send, the shop will send swatchers out that it will call you and show you fabrics. They will send, it will be like, it will be more money, but the product will be, and the process will be like perfect. While when you do something out of town, you have to send them the fabric that trims everything, and they execute the thing. They won't be looking for fabrics for you. So it's almost kind of like you have to do a lot of balances, with your numbers and juggle things around and see, okay, I really want to spend a lot of money doing this, but how then kind of like balance my budget, and then you do something, else and something different. And the tricky part is like, once you hit the stage for tech, I mean, to me, it's super important that you're almost done by the time you hit tech. Because you start if you're not finished by then, it becomes a little bit of a snowballing, because you start getting notes from the director, from the producer, from the performer that like this, I can move, I can do that. So it starts piling up. So the better shape you are going into tech, it will be the best process for you, because then you start, the things change, especially if it's a new musical. They take away numbers, they shift them around, they add new songs, and you need to be quick, really, really like quick on your feet to make changes. Sometimes it's like you spend, and this is true, you spend in any Broadway show, you spend thousands of dollars on a costume, and then for whatever reason that costume gets cut. You cannot never take it personally, just move on, and you have to go out in the world and find something to replace it. And that costume may end up being replaced by something you bought at the Gap or something like that, until during the preview process, until you figure out what's going to be at the end and execute that. But it's very delicate, because sometimes that Gap shirt or whatever it is, the producer, the director starts loving it, and the actor too, so you end up with that piece. So it's really unpredictable. So you really have to be kind of on top of your game in terms of like being really fast to kind of predict what could happen and what will be your solution to it.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think it's really interesting, and something that I try to express in the class is that a lot of people have the idea that a costume designer mainly does renderings, does sketches, when really it's doing spreadsheets and doing organizational tasks. Just to give my students a little bit of an idea, what are some of the ranges of budgets that you've worked with, either as an associate or on designing a show in New York?
I have worked with budgets of like $10,000, and I've worked with budgets of literally $2.3 million. I did a show for the Rockettes at Radio City, and that was our budget. It was incredible. But when you think about it, they're like, the line of the Rockettes is 36 plus their covers is like 41. So if you pay, $3,500 for a costume made, costume for the Rockettes, you just multiply that by 41, and then bam, you have a lot of money already spent. So the budget thing, it's just a number, but you need to be clever about like how do you spend that money, and very responsible at the end of the day. I usually am very, I don't know if it's good or bad, to be honest with you, but I'm really kind of conscious of budget, and I always try to stay in budget. I feel like once I agree to deliver a show within a budget, I kind of should stay within that number, unless there are changes. So what happens is, like, let's say you're in previews or something like that, and the director, the producer, the writer, whoever it is that has the power to say something, says like, oh, we need to add a new number, and it will need to have new costumes. So those things are not included in your budget, but you need to be really fast and say, okay, you need 10 more costumes. And now the equation is different, because now you start thinking about what we call rush delivery, meaning that you're going to go to a shop and going to say, like, we need these costumes and we need it for tomorrow. So if that costume costs $3,000, they will add like 25, 30%, whatever extra on what they call rush delivery charges. So you have to go with that number. You have to be, usually sometimes you should inflate the number a little bit, so that you negotiate with the producer to bring it back to eventually what you want. So you have to be good negotiating as well. So if you need like $10,000, sometimes I go and I ask for 15. So we negotiate, and it's, okay, I agreed to do 10, but 10 is actually the number I felt comfortable with from the beginning. So it takes a lot, I think, in our industry, more than anything, besides your talent, whatever you do, if you're a designer, an actor, a director, it takes a lot also of social skills, which I think are very important. I think you need to be really, really careful and really conscious of polishing your social skills constantly, whatever you do, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of different personalities in the theater, and you have to keep your cool. You have to keep yourself focused and center, and I think it's very important that you walk in a room, whatever it is, and you know how to read the room, and you know how to read people, whether it's in a fitting, in a meeting with producers, with directors, with theater owners, with like regional theater, artistic directors, whatever it is. You have to learn how to develop those social skills that are mostly, in like communication. You have to know how to address that, no matter what you do in this business. You're going to be dealing with like people with a lot of anxiety or stress or insecurity or even neurotic at times. And you have to know how to navigate those waters. And sometimes it's all in the same meeting, all on the same table. So, and you have to develop somehow a thick skin. And what I mean is, like, you cannot take any of what they say personally. If they tell us like, oh my God, I hate that costume, you can't like be, wounded or hurt by that. You just like, usually what I do is like, okay, what do you hate about it? Is it the shape? Is it the color? Is it the trim? And sometimes, it's something very, like, oh, I hate those blue buttons, and you replace them, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, it's great. So what I mean is, like, be a good listener instead of being, go for confrontation. Because if you go from confrontation, then it's kind of somehow escalates, and you build a wall, the other person builds a wall, and the communication kind of stops. But if sometimes you're being, like, told like impossible notes, and I would think like, you just listen to the note, whatever it is, however ridiculous it may be. You just nod and walk away and cool down and think about it, and then come back later and say, listen, I cannot give you 20 new costumes for tomorrow, but what if we take the 20 that we have and we change this and that? And usually you'll find that there's a compromise. But if instead of doing that, you just go into a confrontation, and while this person is like in the heat of the moment, whether it's a director, choreographer, producer, telling you something in a very heated way, and you start in a very defensive way, I think it doesn't go anywhere. It's very hard to do because, like, it's a natural reaction, but I think it's very important that you kind of like take a step back and listen always, which is very hard a thing to develop. But being a good listener, it's key for whatever you do.
I know from working with you regionally that it's so important when you're working with a small budget, especially, to be well connected and have good relationships with shops and theaters and people that you've worked with in the past, because you never know when you're going to have to call on them to help you.
Absolutely.
Is there any advice? I know that you mentioned you going through the assistant and associate process to get some of those connections in New York, but can you name some of the theaters that you worked at that you really feel helped propel your career and helped propel those connections you have?
Well, let me tell you something. I think it's very important that whenever you work on a project, you think on everybody on that project on the same level. Do not make distinctions. It's like the director is more important than the assistant director, or this and that, because you will never know what those relationships will be. So let's say right now you will be, starting as an assistant in whatever, position you are, director, choreographer, actor, not acting, but a designer of any kind. There will be other assistants and other associates as well in that project. And it's important that you connect with them, you develop a relationship with them, because eventually, just like you, that you want to be then a designer or a director or a choreographer, those people will be the same. And you don't know what that connection right there will take you in the future. So don't take for granted, like the people you meet. And the more connections you make, the better. And when you're working on a project, whether the experience is good or bad, you always learn something and you know new people. And I think you have to always keep kind of those relationships. For example, you do a show and you build something, and that those clothes go back in stock. Then sometime in the future, if you have a good relationship with that first theater that you build those costumes, you may be doing a project that you won't be needing those costumes. And then you can call them up and say, hey, remember those clothes that I designed for the check of plays. Is it possible for random for I'm doing this smaller show, whatever. So it's really important that you keep those connections. And the more you work, the more connections you have. You have with all kinds of people in this business, and you never know what's going to be. I mean, for me, I started working at the Alley Theater in Houston in, I don't know, I think it was 2005. I did my first show there, and I ended up doing at least 26 productions there. And doing 26 shows there, I developed a relationship with the shop, with everybody in the theater. And I developed also an enormous amount of costumes that I had designed and built in their stock. So then when I was doing a show regionally that I didn't have the budget, I will be able to pull from that stock without being charged and things like that. So it's really important that you keep always those connections alive. And I think one thing is important also is like in order to keep those connections is take care of your reputation, not only as an artist, but your reputation as a person, right? You can separate the artist from the person. The artist could be sublime and talented and everything you want to, and the person could be not that nice to work with. So I think it's very important that you always take care of both aspects of that equation, the artist and the persona itself, because it's like a friend of mine say, your reputation is like a virus, it spreads really fast. If you're like all of a sudden, like consider like a difficult designer to work with or a difficult director to work with, it spreads really bad, and people start like, oh yeah, he's good, but it's not really enjoyable to work with him. So I think that's very important. And I love so much what I do that I always try to have a lot of fun when I do it, even in a silly way, and try to have probably many stories about like crazy stuff that I've done, but I really enjoy, what we do is driven by passion. Nobody's doing this to make themselves millionaires. So you need to enjoy it. You really need to enjoy it. I think it's important.
I think that's a great time to open up questions to my students or things that you're interested in. So unmute yourself, feel free to ask your questions, and you might want to introduce yourself to Alejo.
Hello, I'm Matt.
Hi, Matt.
I had a question about, so when you, one of the videos that we saw was you designed for the Three Musketeers.
Uh-huh.
And you had said you wanted them to look like rock stars and give off that vibe. Now, was that your idea, or was that the director's idea? How does the collaboration start before you do your research, I guess?
That's a good question. I think it was kind of mutual, because in that case was the director was somebody I worked with before many times, so we became friends. So I have my communication with him is like in a different level, after you've done lots of projects. So we both agreed that the text itself was a little bit campy, maybe. I hate to talk about like a playwright, but it was not refined, it was not period, it was very contemporary and very, very kind of like silly comedy in aspects. So we then decided that, well, then to make sure that the period is a period that is very kind of pompous in a way. So we realized that let's have more fun with this. Let's not take ourselves seriously, because then we're gonna be playing against the comedy in the play. Like even the vocabulary that these actors were using in the play was very contemporary. So it would have been like a dichotomy. It will be like kind of like bad if we put like real period clothes. It will, to these people behaving and talking in a very contemporary way. So in that aspect, we talked a lot about it, and he trusts me. That's the one thing, after you work a few times with the director and they keep hiring you, you realize that they trust your eye and your aesthetic and you think alike. So sometimes, they rely on you, like to come with an idea, and they say, I love it. And then you start feeding from each other, and they give you references of whatever it is. Sometimes you get the most bizarre references from directors, and you need to figure out, like sometimes they're very specific that, even though you're doing a Shakespeare, they can tell you like, oh, I want that person to look like Mick Jagger. And you have an idea, you go, of like what is the essence of Mick Jagger. But sometimes they come and they tell you, it's like, oh, I think she should be like wind. And you're like, okay, and you figure out like, what the fuck is wind? You know what I mean? So then you come up with something that you think is wind, and then you show it to him or to her, and then you get feedback and you get it from there, right? But that's
So
why I
you're
say you need to have to know how to read and communicate with because sometimes, directors are like very specific. They have a vision in their head, and it's sometimes not defined, but they can find a metaphor or an analogy to describe the character that is not necessarily, something specific or visual that you can like grab onto.
so so then I guess what my next question would be is you don't start designing then until you talk with the director. Like obviously you've read the play and you've got your ideas, but you don't start.
Definitely, because at the end of the day, I mean, like whatever it is, character comes first, and then you need to tell the story that the way the director wants to tell it. It doesn't matter if it's like Hamlet or like a new play. The director has a vision, and I think the best result in any play is when everybody in that team, the lighting designer, the sound designer, the set designer, the costume, they're all telling the same story. Because then it comes together, it feels cohesive, and like the actor feels comfortable in the environment, in the clothes, with the props. So I think that the director, has a tough job because you have to be the captain of that ship, and he has to bring everybody, back to the same road, make sure that they don't get dispersed. And it's hard, but I think always my best work, I think, is not the prettiest, is the ones that everybody was like talking the same language, going to the same way, and telling the same story in a very specific way that the director envisioned it. So it's important, to answer your question, that you have those previous conversations with the director and try to get in their brain to kind of see what is what is a vision, and it's always very different because, sometimes directors doing the play because they're like passionate about it, and sometimes they're doing because they're just being hired for it, and they didn't have a job for that slot, and sometimes it's like they just tell you, do what you want, and they will react to it. Sometimes they're very like that, very empirical. They need to see something finished in order for them to react. Sometimes that could be frustrating because you have to do your whole process in order to get a reaction. And by the time you get a reaction, it's not always that easy to change it because of time, because of money, because of so many things.
How many shows are you usually working on at one time when you're obviously not in COVID world?
It depends. I think you always have more than one project because as a freelance artist, you try to book yourself as much as you can. It's hard to make a living in theater. And I'm sure you know that already, even from the get-go. So you try to, book as many jobs as you can handle. I am one that I like to be kind of on top. I like to. I don't think it's fair to take jobs and then inform people like, oh, I can't be in tech, I will send an associate. I think it's not great for you, and it's not great for the for the theater, unless they really want to, and you're upfront and you tell them, I can go to previews, but I can't be there 5 days of tax or whatever. So you negotiate that. But usually you take as many as you can. I don't know. It could be 2, it could be 5, it could be 6, because what happens is like the more work you get, you book ahead. So you can be in tech and doing research while sitting in the dark for a show that you're doing 6 months from now. But in the meantime, another theater is working on mock-ups for another show that is happening after the one you're making. And then you're negotiating a rate of reading plays that you're going to be later. So it all depends. But usually, and you'll see that, you will try to book as many jobs as you can. At least until you feel, like financially comfortable enough that you can pick and choose and decide, when you want to work and when you don't. I do want to say that I'm kind of a person that I love my work, and I'm somehow a workaholic like everybody else. But I do like to have a personal life, and I do like to take time off, and I do like to travel and things like that. I do. I don't make my work my life. And there's a lot of people in this business that they do, and there's nothing wrong, but it's something you choose.
That's very important.
Hi, I'm Jude.
Hi, Jude.
I have a question. So when I was looking at a lot of the works that you've done, I see you've done a lot of shows for the Alley Theater.
Yes.
And Houston was originally the direction I was looking at going towards. I have a connection at the Alley Theater, Cheney Tullis. I don't know if you know him, but I was wondering, do you have any tips for trying to go towards Houston and start your career in Houston?
What discipline are you in?
I am a lighting designer.
Oh, I think that's great. I think well, I personally love the Alley Theater. I think it's phenomenal place. It's one of the most prestigious regional theaters in the country. I don't know if you've been inside, but like the facilities are like incredible. You know, it's one of the few, theaters that have a costume shop like on the 17th floor with most beautiful views. It's not in a basement. We have great stock, great artisans. So I recommend. I mean, there's a lot happening in Houston because you have also the opera, you have the ballet, and you have Tuts. And there's a lot of smaller companies as well that are doing a great job. I mean, when I've been there, I also went to see all the theater there, like in the smaller venues, and they're doing like really wonderful job. They have a really great community of theater artists there. So yeah, as a place, I mean, if you like the hot, humid weather, I will highly recommend it.
Yeah, Alejo, just so you know, we're only about 3 hours away from Houston here. So the next time you do get working there, please let me know, and maybe I can get some students to come out and meet
That
you.
would be wonderful.
Yeah,
that would be wonderful. Houston is a city that I love because I met so many wonderful people there, so many wonderful artists there. I mean, it's great, and they have a great and vibrant theater scene. Important, especially if you're technical, because you've become more versatile. You know what I mean? Like you can do the ballet, you can do the theater, you can do Tuts, you can do the opera, you can do all of the above. So start making connections, more connections.
All right, thank you.
No, you're very welcome.
Howdy, I'm Edwa. I mainly focus on like costume design and technology, more technology. But I was wondering about, as far as doing research for costume design, what are some unexpected sources that you've found research, like outside of like more, I don't know, more normal sources of research?
That is a great question, because and I'm gonna be give you a little bit tough love now. When I started this career, for me, research was going to the library. Research was, if you needed a picture of Marie Antoinette, you will go to the library, I mean, and get different paintings, etc. Now, basically, you have at your fingertips everything you want in the world. And I am telling you that I'm going to give you tough love, because I'm really upset when students only rely on Google Images and Wikipedia. That's wrong. Right now, you have, in the comfort of your bed or your couch or your school like computer, you can go and have access to any museum in the world, any costume institute in the world, any library in the world. You just have it all. So do not rely only on Google Images. Be inquisitive and be curious, and keep going in that rabbit hole until you find exactly what you want. You know, for us, you know, the beginning, you know, finding, you know, pictures, real pictures from like period, you know, like especially, you know, from the late 1800s on, you needed to go to books and like figure out like creative ways that like where can I find, what type of book could it be that I can find, like uniforms or this or that. Nowadays, you have like everything. So I think it's up to you to have that ability to find, how can I, how can I get to this, like museum in Finland or in Japan or whatever. I'll give you an example, Edward. I was doing a show at the Old Globe, a place also in San Diego where I've done many, many shows. And it was a show about George Bernard Shaw, and it was period. And we built this linen duster for women that it was based on a book I have from the Tokyo Institute that has all real pieces from the period. And with the draper, we were looking at them. Sorry for the people not in costume, it's a little technical, but we were looking at these pictures, and there were these seams that we didn't know, that we found it very confusing. We didn't know how they ended, where are they going. So we basically contacted the Tokyo Institute through email, and they took that piece from the archives, they put it on a dress form, and they took pictures from every angle and they sent it to us. I'm not telling you that it will do that all the time. They actually told us, we usually don't do this. So kind of like implying, don't ask us again. But you know what I mean? You need to go beyond that Google image search and like even get a VPN. And if you're doing a show based in France, start, like using a VPN and like put the location, like in France, because even in Google, you get a different set of images that you're, like set in the US, and then start digging, like what are the libraries that I should be looking for this, and then send them emails and questions, and they will send you maybe to a little local museum, and then you're gonna get that image that you're thinking is not the one that everybody's using, and it's not the one that I'm tired of seeing, and is the most unusual and is more specific about it. So I think it needs, I think you have the technology to do it. You just need to develop the tools to do it besides Google Image.
Thank you.
I love that.
And especially, Eduard, if you're something in technical, because you can go, I don't know, you can start contacting, like people like couture houses, like technical music. I mean, there's so many possibilities. So it's about keep digging up until you build up that library that then is, once it's in your head, you can just pull from it.
I'm going to ask for a last call for questions. Does anyone else have any questions? I think we're coming to the end of the time. I don't want to take up Alejo's time.
So short. Are we over? That's.
I had a quick
available.
question.
If you guys want to keep me a little longer, I don't have a problem.
Okay.
Shelby.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Is there a specific example of when you had a costume that when it was on stage and it was just in different lighting or whatever, you had to change it a couple times or maybe do a drastic change, and how you keep talking about communication. When you talk to the director or the assistant director, was there specific things that you had to probe about with the lighting and the costume and like the collaboration of that?
That's a great question, Shelby, because sometimes your work, Jude, can be enhanced or destroyed by lighting. So I think there has to be a communication between the lighting designer and the costume designer, because the lighting designer work essentially starts when they get in the theater and they see everything. So I think you have to start communication beforehand and show them sketches or swatches of fabrics, or like if you have a scene with a very specific palette, tell him in advance, hey, there's a scene in Act 2 that I'm using mostly shades of blue, so please do not put any amber light because it will make everything look like mushroom, which is the worst to me, when they look like, I call it mushroom because you don't know what color is. Is it green? Is it brown? Is it red? You don't really know. So you have to, and it has happened to me that I was doing a Broadway show and all of a sudden, the lighting was so yellow and it was killing everything, that there was a lot of blue in it. So I actually had my assistant give me a big swatch of the main fabric on stage, and I went to the line designer, I put it on the table and said, like, is there any chance that you can make that look like this? And then it's like, oh my God, this is it. So he worked. I mean, was it perfect? No, but at some point you have to compromise. but I think it's good that depending, you can like read the room, if you're gonna go for, if you have a relationship that I think you should have with a lighting designer, try to go to him or to her first and start a dialogue, instead of going to the director and then the director communicates. So you play the telephone game that. So, and usually in a tech, the director is by the lighting designer because that's the one that, like they working, basically this, they start the deep work when they are in tech. So you can talk to both of them. But I think it's crucial. You have to speak out, and always, it's important your approach to be, like if you're gonna start, if you want him to change something, you have to approach him or her nicely, always, kind of in a very kind of approachable way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions?
I think we may be falling to the silent point in the questions. Alejo, thank you so very, very much for talking with us today. I think that you really brought to light some of the lessons we've been trying to learn in the class, and then give us a much wider perspective because of your amazing range of the different types of theaters that you've worked for. Once again, thank you so much. And as I said, I'll be looking out, but let me know when you're working in Houston. Would love to come visit you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was a pleasure working with you, talking with you guys, and I wish you the very best on your careers. And yes, like hanging there is really hard times.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's hope that we all have careers at the end of all this.
Oh, I think it will eventually will happen. I mean, don't discourage yourself, because it's not, it's a roller coaster, this business. You do not think that you're gonna ever get to a place that you're gonna be happy and comfortable, because that kind of uncertainty of like where your next job is gonna come from, or will they ever hire me again, or whatever, it's kind of always there. It's always palpitating. But I think you get used to that, and you just focus. If I can give you one advice, which is really, really hard, no matter where you are in your career, is like kind of like keep focus on your own road. You know what I mean? Like it's really, really, really hard not to get distracted, like trying to look what's happening, on the roads on the right, on the left. And that kind of like takes focus and attention and energy away about your own road. You know what I mean? Because usually when you look at that, basically you're comparing yourself. It's like, oh my God, we went to school together, and look at him, he's already doing this or that. You always compare yourself with the person who's doing better than you. So it's always kind of like a lose-lose situation, because if they're already doing better, why am I comparing to them? My road is different than his or hers. So that's something that I found that it's hard in this business. I mean, it's kind of discouraging when like you feel like the opportunities are never, not the same. But right now, I think we're living like in a really interesting moment that, with all this like social movement that has started, after George Floyd's death, with Black Lives Matter, that has affected the theater enormously. And there's a lot of organizations working on it. I'm part of like two of them, Design Action, and also I'm in a mentoring project that just started for college and high school BIPOC kids. So there's a lot happening in this business. So you have to always kind of be receptive of the changes, and like focus on your story and keep going, and don't get discouraged, because it's an up and down. It's a really kind of winding road, and just keep your determination, and you'll get there. I mean, like, I'm sorry to be long, but like my journey, I came from a different country here without having any connections. I didn't know a single person. I didn't have money, and I didn't have paperwork to work here. And I came here and I picked up a phone book. There was no Google at that time, and I called people that I admire. To me, it was important to know who came before me doing what I do. I think still to this day, I love to study, and I always researching and doing things because I do have passion for what I do. So to me, it was very important to have the knowledge of who came before me. So I just call up designers I admire and ask for interviews. And that's how I got my first job, an internship or like a PA job, which is the bottom of the bottom, with Anne Roth, a very famous designer. She was just finishing a movie called The English Patient that she won the Oscar for, and she was doing 2 other movies, and Talented Mr. Ripley and another movie, and doing a play in New York. And I worked with her for 2 weeks, and then she recommended me to someone else, and that was it. And that's how I got into theater and doing what I do. So you never know where your journey is going to take you. You know, you're having a great chance to study and to make a network, even school. You know, the designers will meet directors, the directors will meet designers, and hopefully all those relationships will linger. And as they get in the professional field and start working, you start calling each other and using each other, and developing those relationships and growing those relationships. So just don't get discouraged, especially this time, because now feels that everything's so dark and that you're gonna, you know, come out of school and theater is dead. But you have to think that it will happen. And the last thing I want to say, if you're in theater, if you're in costumes, I will say consider going into television. And the reason is just simply, to me, simple mathematics. I think there's a specific number of theaters in the country. There's a specific numbers of theaters on Broadway, and the numbers of shows done is kind of the same every year, but the pool of designer keeps growing and growing. But there's so much content now, new content in TV with all these new platforms, with Amazon, with Netflix, with Hulu, with so many, and they're doing wonderful work. So if you're interested in those jobs, get into that business. I think it's a great business. And in truth to be told, I don't know in the other fields, lighting or production design or in TV, but in costume design, the progression is quite fast from like PA to assistant to associate to designer. It's pretty fast. I have at least 3 people who has assisted me in the past who are now like designing major movies and major TV shows. And I'm talking about somebody who assisted me maybe 3 or 4 years ago, like just designed a movie In the Heights and Hustlers with Jennifer Lopez. So it's a good thing to investigate if you're interested in that life. And sorry for being taking so much time, but thank you again. Thank you everybody for coming to this Zoom meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful. We'll talk to you later, Alejo. I'm going to keep
Absolutely.
my time for just a second, just to talk about some assignment stuff. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I will let you talk. Thank you again, guys. Have a good one.